Welcome, everybody. This is session number 6 for the Architectural and Engineering PortGen Workshop, the virtual workshop. And today I know that Tamika is on with us. So Tamika, if you would like to go ahead and welcome everybody from the Port of Seattle. She is actually texting, I think. Oh, there she is.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much again. Lily, Tanya, Jessica, Marnie, Daryl, always a pleasure. Again, I just can't thank you all enough. I really appreciate seeing everyone's faces. Looks like we may have, I'm aware of maybe 2 people that I haven't seen before, at least your names. So again, every week, as long as we add new people and then of course have the returners, that definitely helps. Appreciate George for stating that this has been very helpful. That's again the key. We want to help you. We want to encourage you, ask questions, again, like Tanya said. And then again, when we do have prime contractors and agencies like the port, ask those questions and make sure, again, that you get the answers. Let them know, again, what's important to you, why it's important to hire small businesses, and at the same time, just engage overall. So again, thank you very much for participating. Please be sure, and it's a plug for Marnie, to fill out those surveys. We definitely need to know how each class went for you, what was good, what was bad, and then overall for the program. We are looking to hopefully try to do this again next year. Cross fingers, Lily. And we just want to make sure that, again, we improve. We tailor it to your needs and your wants. So again, thank you so very much. I have to jump off. Believe it or not, they pay me to work a little bit more. Present to commission tomorrow. So I'm finalizing our PowerPoint and numbers for the year, as well as doing a plug for this particular workshop. So again, thank you all very much.
Thank you, Tamika.
Thank
so
you.
Just so that everybody understands that our workshops, the PortGen Workshop series that we've been doing would not be possible without the support of the Port of Seattle and then also USDOT Small Business Transportation Resource Center Northwest. And so project director for SBTRC Northwest is Lily Keefe. And so Lily, give us the good word of the day.
The good word of the day. Thank you for joining us today. I know that a lot of things out there that you want to do, but you stuck with us. I guess you really love us. So, I mean, I've seen Christina, Casey, and Harigu from Portland, and then Atto and Zenden. I just want to say thank you. I see the commitment. Listen, work with us. I know that some of the people think that, I go to class, I'm just going to waste my 3 hours class. But we are here, we are your advocate. So we are going to support you. It's not just getting the contract, but get you ready. I mean, that's the key. I'm not going to be tired telling the people it's not going to be easy, but if you give me the opportunity to work with you guys, to serve you more, let us know. I have the opportunity. I mean, I'm so fortunate. I get the support like Graham Ralston, our presenter today, used to be my boss, used to be the acting director for USDOT or SDBU. So he support me. He believe in me. He's originally from, Seattle. That's why he's going to support me anytime, But this is the type of relationship that I gained throughout the years. That's why it's really important to join this kind of class. You gain networking, you meet people. You probably don't get connected, don't get like the benefits right away. But over the years, because of your commitment, it's gonna come out about something. So without further ado, Graham Ralston, our presenter today, listen, he is the most knowledgeable person. He understands the regulations. He is a CPA, he's a lawyer, everything, it's in him. Take him as the resource. And also, if you need some help to work with him on a one-on-one basis, I'll be happy to sponsor you. That's another reason why we are so fortunate to have Port of Seattle to support our program. So we have funding to support you guys more with all this one-on-one and the follow-up. So without further ado, Graham Ralston with Ralston Law.
Yes.
Take it away, Graham.
All right. Well, thank you for that introduction, Tanya, and I should say, or Lily, and I should say I know Tanya and Lily both from my time with the USDOT and after, and that dates back to 2010, and they are absolute rock stars. And you as small business owners are lucky to have them on your team. I'm excited to be here today. This is home for me, talking to small business owners, especially about transportation issues. It's exciting to talk about new opportunities in this, for small business owners. But also when you think about, when I first joined USDOT, it was right after the recession in 2009. And there was these American Reinvestment Recovery Act dollars that were being rolled out. You guys, this is such a key time to have your business ready to go because, and we'll talk a little bit more about this at the end, but we could expect more money to be flowing into infrastructure and transportation in a President-elect Biden administration. We see that coming, that is something that he's advocated for. So it's important that you're ready so that when these dollars start flowing, just like they did with ARA, the American Reinvestment Recovery Act, that you can go and capture these dollars in these contracts. There's going to be a huge demand for small businesses to perform on those projects. Before we jump into the presentation, I do want to make sure I say thank you to the Port of Seattle and the Northwest SBTRC and Lily and Tanya for inviting me to participate in the presentation today. As Lily mentioned, I did return, I worked for the USDOT through 2018. I did serve on the internal presidential transition team, which meant that I helped in the transition and the training of Trump's team as they came on to the USDOT. Soon after, I decided that I wanted to get back to Washington State and my roots. I grew up on the peninsula in Port Angeles. I went to University of Washington for undergrad and law school at Seattle U. There's another ranking senior official from DOT, Peter Rogoff, who's out at Sound Transit, those that aren't familiar with him already. But in my time at the USDOT, my focus was on small business issues, the DBE program, and since leaving and starting my own private practice, I look at my private practice as finding solutions for small business owners, and the fact that I'm an attorney and a CPA are just additional tools to help my clients. So, the focus is let's solve the goal first, and maybe that doesn't mean it's a legal issue or CPA. Maybe we're talking about marketing, some other financial issue, government affairs, or just networking or connecting. However I can help you, please let me know. I want to let everyone know, please, if you have questions throughout the presentation, I always appreciate more interactive presentations. So as questions come up, please feel free to ask. We can talk about it. If it's getting to, if we're discussing it for too long, we can always have a conversation after the presentation as well. There's a number of questions that I want to ask at first to get a little bit more understanding of who's on this call. So I want to start first with, what do you think is the most important part of your business? And the poll is open, so go ahead and jump on in.
Well, I am Haradu. I am a transportation engineer with NMRM Engineers. And thank you for the question. I'll just go first. And I would say all of the above, all of them is important to me. Of course, I need human resources. I just feel like it's all of it.
Mm-hmm. Okay. It looks like we've completed the poll. Is that correct, Marnie? Okay.
Yeah.
So if we look at these results, we can see that all 4 people selected business development. Now, I agree that all of these issues, these 5 different issues are important, but my philosophy, I feel like you are the most important part of your small business, okay? The more you focus on you, the individual, the better your finances, the better your business development is, the better your any kind of labor or employee issues or HR issues. That your small business, you know, if you're the only employee, you're the only person there, your business is only going to be as good as you are, right? Are you showing up to your organization, right? And this is where it starts with you. If you're sick, are you even able to show up to work? No, when you're a small business owner, you don't get sick time. You don't get paid vacation time, right? We all know this. So taking care of ourselves, which is even more important in light of COVID, right? And staying healthy, not only for ourselves, but the people that we serve as CEOs, right? That we need to be at our best so that we can serve the people that work for us and the clients that we're performing projects on. And you can't just isolate your business and say, this is a completely separate entity that I only focus on my business over here. It's completely tied to who you are and what you're doing. That if you're not organized in your personal life, if you don't have good habits over here, you can't expect that all of a sudden your business is going to carry some kind of different attributes or traits. So you need to develop those habits, good organizational skills, making sure that you're taking care of yourself physically and mentally, so that when you go to work on your business, you're bringing those great skills and habits, organization and structure from there over into your business life. What I want to do too is I'm going to open it up. We're going to go through a couple other polling questions just so I can get a sense of who's on the call today. And then also you can get a sense of who's on the call with joining us today as other small business owners. So Marnie, let's go ahead and go to polling question number 2, please. Has COVID impacted your business? We've got yes for the better financially, yes for the worse financially, neutral, or no. Okay, we've got all 5 results in. So we've got yes for the worst financially and neutral. I'm going to write these down. Okay, let's go ahead and go to the next one. Have you received any government resources? Select all that apply. PPP, EIDL, which is Economic Injury Disaster Loan, state grants, city, county grants. And if you haven't heard of any of these, maybe I should have put a checkbox down at the bottom, but this would be a great place for maybe you to put a message in the chat and we can send out, I'd be happy to send out more info on each of these opportunities. Even though PPP is closed now, there might be another round coming up. We'll see what happens with this stimulus bill. But we want to make sure that you're aware of all these different resources you can take advantage of. Okay, we've got 2 more. All right. So we've got a little bit of participation in these different financing and grant programs. Okay, let's go ahead and go to the next poll, please. Let's see what kind of different business entity structures we have from our participants. Are you a sole proprietor, LLC, or do you have an S Corp tax election? Are you a C Corp, or are you unsure? All right, LLCs, maybe wait another 5-10 seconds. And one unsure, okay. All right, and did we have one more question or was that it, Marnie? I think that was it. Is that it?
That's all of them.
Okay. All right. Thank you guys thank you, Marnie, for helping to organize the polling. And thank you to the answering the questions to the respondents. And please, once again, feel free to jump in, ask questions. Because I am an attorney and a CPA, that's the focus of my business planning presentation. So the most expected legal issues that many of you are going to face deal with employment, corporate entity selection, tax implications, licensing, a little bit of intellectual property, not that much, mostly trademark if you're in construction, and then also with customers and contracting, and what about current COVID issues. So first, employment law considerations. This is the most often question I receive from my small business owners. Those that have moved along, that have hired people, these are the issues that most often come up. The number one way, I'm going to start this off, to head off any kind of employment issues is treating people with dignity and respect. We see that business owners that lack a respect for employees and people that work for them, generally there's going to be more issues in an organization like that. That doesn't take an attorney that you need to hire, right, to treat people with dignity and respect. It doesn't take a lot of money to have an HR handbook at all to treat people with dignity and respect. So if you can do something as a business owner, at least to head off or avoid employment law issues, start there. Because anything else, when people start looking for ways to sue their employer or issues that come up, it's usually because there isn't a good relationship and the employee is looking for an opportunity then to go after that employer. So the first major issue that we see in terms of employment law issues are classifying people between an independent contractor versus an employee, right? A 1099 versus W-2. And that's some other nomenclature that some of you may have heard before. A lot of people might think, hey, I wrote on a contract that they're an independent contractor. I've got this independent contractor agreement that means that they're an independent contractor. They're not a W-2, so I'm not beholden to any of those wage laws or any of those other issues. Incorrect, okay? That's not correct. What you need to be doing is looking at the facts of that engagement with that person, right? Whether you think that they're a 1099 or a W-2, the government can actually reclassify them and say, hey, based on what the actual interaction was with this person, you should have been paying them overtime. They were really a W-2 employee because you had a set schedule for them, right? They had to show up to work between 8 to 5. They went to you for all of your guidance, right? And you approved all their work product, right? You were overseeing all of that work. So when you're looking at the actual facts of that engagement and the degree of control or independence that that person has, that is what actually dictates if it ends up in a court or in any kind of litigation, if they're a W-2 employee or an independent contractor, okay? There's some questions that are in this presentation, and I'm not going word for word through each one of these slides. This is a good resource for you to come back to. So I've tried to summarize a lot of key points on a lot of these issues, And we don't always remember everything from every presentation. So just know that this is just a good resource for you to come back, but that this is designed more so as an intro for you to spot some issues, okay? So this is one issue for you to be looking at. Another large issue is employment discrimination, whether it's race, gender, orientation, disability. And I have some examples of how to avoid some of those discrimination issues in terms of questions, right? If you're hiring people, so you can ask, are you over the age of 18? Whereas don't ask, how old are you? When did you graduate from college? More specifics there. When it comes to when you're talking about immigration and who you're hiring, are you authorized to work in the United States? You can ask, what languages does someone read? But you can't ask, are you a US citizen, and where you grew up and where were your parents born, or native language, okay? You can ask, would you be willing to relocate if necessary? Would you be willing to work overtime? Once again, you don't want to get into specifics even when asking these questions, right? That once again, if you're treating people with dignity and respect and you mess up and ask one of these questions, the likelihood that you're going to face some kind of lawsuit is minimal. But if you're not treating people with dignity and respect and you're asking people questions that would be a form of discrimination, then you might have issues on hand, okay? So I'm just going back to that again. Dignity and respect with your employees is huge. You can ask about your applicant's ability to perform a specific job function, but you can't ask specific questions about applicant's health or any specific disabilities. Okay. Another key component of employment law issues deals with the Fair Labor Standards Act and the basics of overtime. So those of us in the construction industry, most of your labored employees who are working over 40 hours in a single work week are going to be entitled to 1.5 times the employee's regular rate. Once again, this is important because if you're thinking someone is an independent contractor, but you're treating them as a W-2 employee, and then they bring a lawsuit against you years down the line, you can end up with treble damages, meaning that you have to give back pay on overtime ×3, maybe attorney's fees. So these things can really start to add up. You know, is L&I going to come investigate? Do you owe back pay there? There's all sorts of issues that can come up if you're not classifying people properly as they come to work for you. And if you have questions, a great resource, you know, on any of these employment issues too, and especially for COVID, is you can go to Washington Employment Security Department. So I just alt-tabbed out, meaning I switched out of the presentation, and this is a good website with some more employment resources related to contractors, W-2 employees, and also specific to COVID. And that's esd.wa.gov. esd.wa.gov. Record keeping and personnel files. You need to make sure that you're keeping on hand eligibility to work in the US, their social security number, employees' federal tax withholding. You should keep on hand job descriptions, employment contracts, disciplinary notes, health and safety logs. It is critical that far too often I get a call from a client says, you know, I've got a troubled employee, I need to get rid of them. And I ask, well, what did they do? Well, they did this, you know, a year ago or 2 years ago, and then they've done this and this. I go, well, do you have any kind of incident report? Did you create a log of that? No. And that's the unfortunate thing is you need to make sure that you're keeping a documentation trail for anything that you're doing, even if you don't feel like you need to fire that employee at a certain point in time. But if you're documenting someone's performance or any issues that come up, in case you do have to fire someone a year or 2 years down the line, you want to make sure that there's some kind of documentation trail. And I'm not saying you document with the intent of trying to get rid of someone, right? Because that's not a healthy work environment if you're trying to document just to fire someone. But you want to document, it's a good way just to keep track of, people. It could also, if you're documenting in a way that proposes a challenge to that employee to say, I'm not documenting to think about firing you, but this is a way to document where we are at this point in time, and I'd like to see you overcome these challenges in the future. This is a way for us to grow past these challenges. And I'm making, let's both be accountable to this, to where I want to help you succeed as an employee and that we both grow from here. So it's all about sometimes framing these conversations. Once again, going back to dignity and respect, how are we treating our employees, right? Are we letting them know that we're just creating this documentation in a way that we're framing it to, let's grow together, let's both overcome this challenge. Most of you, I don't think that we have anyone on this call that has over 50 employees, so we're not going to spend much time on the Family and Medical Leave Act, which also many of you are going to be exempt from some of the COVID related employment law issues because, correct, Lily or Tanya, are we aware of any of the participants having 50 or more employees on the call today? Yeah. Okay. I hope we get there though someday. Okay. That's a goal. We want that to be an issue. So let's that's something that we can grow towards. Okay. That's a good issue to have when your company is reaching that size. Okay. Performance management. Let's make sure that we're setting clear expectations for all of our employees, providing accurate, timely feedback, be clear about policies, work rules. This is, once again, dignity and respect. I'm hammering it. And then employee handbooks, policies, procedures, everything else. Yes, that takes time to develop, okay? Don't start from scratch. There's plenty of handbooks that are out there that you can download and say, let me tailor this to my specific company. Let me put my own voice to what this handbook states already, okay? The great thing about that is it gives you employment infrastructure moving forward into the future, right? You want to build an organization that can scale, that can have 50 employees. So if you start off with that handbook at your first or second employee, you've already invested the time now, and now you're scaling your company, right? If it's 10, 20, 30 employees, and they can fit underneath this handbook of policies, procedures, guidelines that's applicable to everyone and for you to follow, right? That even though we're an owner, we're still in it, we work for our companies too, right? Let's be accountable to the same expectations that we're setting our employees. We talked a little bit about this already, discipline and termination, that we're creating a documentation trail. I always like to think that one of the most costly items for companies, especially when you're small, is turnover. If it's you and one other employee and you have to fire someone or they leave for another job, that's half of your business. And what did we start off this presentation talking about? The most important part of this company is you, because when there's only one of you, you are the business. Well, the second most important part of that company is the next person that you hire, right? For those of us in the construction industry, many other trades, people are our most valuable asset. that our company is only going to be as good as the people working for that company. That means that we want to avoid turnover, that we want to avoid disruptions, terminations, whatever we can, right? That's why, going back one slide, we do performance management. It's not just to keep people in line, it's to grow people, to make sure that they're invested in the company. How are you are you giving them time off to be with their family? Are you giving them an option maybe to earn equity in the company, a vesting plan, right? How are you making them feel part of your vision or your path, right? Buy-in. People are the most important part of your company, starting with you and then going into your next couple key hires. You make the wrong first hire, that's really going to slow you down as a company, right? That's probably going to be your highest expense. And if you make the wrong hire and that person isn't producing, and all of a sudden you've got to let that person go, and there's, they bring a litigation or lawsuit against you, that is the most damaging thing to a small business that you can go through. Let's head that off. Dignity and respect, clear expectations, guidelines, okay? Document growth, right? Positive mindset in how we're treating our employees.
Graham, can I ask a quick question on
Yes.
The discipline? It was on the third bullet point. You talk about progressive discipline. I don't think I've heard of that term before. Can you describe that?
Sure. Progressive discipline would be, maybe it doesn't go from straight to letting someone go, okay, to a fireable offense. Maybe you're saying, we're going to reduce your hours, we're going to demote you. I know when there's only two people, that may be a little bit more difficult. And that's very delicate though too, when you're thinking about how is this person's morale going to be in my company if I'm taking these measures. And maybe, you and I might call it a demotion, but maybe you're going to move someone in a company. You're not going to tell them you're demoting them, but you're going to frame it in a way that says, hey, we think that your skill set, you're showing a lot of attributes in this area, and we want to move you over here, right? Once again, it's that positive spin, that positive mindset compared to, hey, this is a disciplinary action. We're moving you over here. How do you think the morale is going to be for that person, where you're making it clear that it's disciplinary, the negative connotation to it compared to, it's negative, right? But when you're expressing it in a way of, hey, I think your skill set is going to be better suited over here. It's a demotion and a disciplinary action. Okay. They don't know that though. And you're trying, you get one bad employee too in a group of, if you have 10 or 15 employees, all of a sudden that toxicity or the negativity from that one employee starts to drag everyone else around, right? And that's where sometimes you have to think about, just letting that person go too, right? How is their impact on the rest of the organization? But I think that even when we call it discipline between us owners, but when you talk to an employee, I don't like to use the negative connotations. I think that if you're upfront with people when things happen and you're documenting it from the start, I don't think it's fair to employees. If you say, hey, a year ago or 2 years ago, this happened. If you never had that conversation with someone and you had an issue with it, do you think it's fair to that person? Probably not. You wouldn't want to be treated that way. You'd want someone to be upfront with you. And once again, it doesn't have to be negative. It's, hey, let's work on this together. I'm going to document this in a way that this is something for both of us to grow on, right? For us to move past. That could be even considered progressive discipline, even though you're not telling them it's discipline. Okay. personal liability for a supervisor. If you're the owner, you're going to be faced with this regardless. Or if you're in a situation where you've worked at a company, what's your liability? Because when you're an attorney, and I don't practice personal injury, but if I was, and the first thing they teach you in law school is you sue anyone and everyone that you can, okay? And then whoever ends up paying, that's fine. You just get your money for your client, and then you let those other parties sort it out. So if I'm suing, I'm just going to say Microsoft, so I'm not picking on any transportation company. But if you're suing Microsoft and there's an employment issue, and that supervisor discriminated against you or punched an employee or punched you, you'd be suing Microsoft. You'd be suing your supervisor, maybe the head supervisor if they knew about it, the intermediate supervisor. So there is potentially personal liability, even if you are a supervisor and you're committing what's considered a intentional act, right? That's different than if you were on the job and you were somewhat negligent, or there's a workers' comp claim where there's something that's called strict liability, where the company may not even be held harmless or liable, right, in a workers' comp claim. But more often than not, this is the only way that you as a supervisor could be sued. Are there any questions on employment law issues before we jump into entity selection and tax considerations?
Graham, I just wanted to share a horror story on the independent contractor versus W-2 employee that I experienced.
Yeah.
I was working at a company that sold CPR training classes. So my job as a W-2 employee was to schedule the classes with the clients, and then I would contact our independent contractor presenters to perform the classes for us. Most of them had other jobs or other work that they did outside of it. It was just kind of a fun thing that they like to do because they're firefighters and such. But we got audited by Employment Security in 2008 when everybody was filing for unemployment due to the recession. And they came in and audited our 11 independent contractors and found 3 of them to be considered employees because they didn't have a business license or outside clients to the work they were performing for us. And we were liable to employment taxes back 3 years that they had worked for us. So be careful. It's the best thing.
And penalties too, probably,
yeah,
right?
And penalties. Yeah, it was horrible. Yeah. It was horrible.
Yeah.
The weird thing was there were, when you looked at I called them my stable of instructors, there were 11 of them and only 3 of them were deemed to be employees.
Mm-hmm.
So it really was weird that and then we had to completely change up the way we handled our instructors at that time. So it can throw your company into a tailspin when they come in and do those audits.
And Marnie, you probably called them all independent contractors, right? Or you probably had an agreement that said you're an independent contractor, right?
They all had signed an independent contractor agreement. They all utilized their own equipment. We would provide them, if requested, like printed out handbooks, or they could print out handbooks on their own. I managed the schedule, but they all elected to provide the service for those schedules. We negotiated their price for that particular class. So there wasn't like a set hourly rate. So we thought we had checked all the boxes, but the ones that got us caught or got called out were the ones who did not have a business license and did not have outside clients. We were their only client, so they deemed us their employer. And they weren't marketing themselves for other clients as well. That was kind of the weirdness or the trick.
I think that's a great example, and thank you for bringing that up. And I just want to highlight in there, so Marnie stated they were all considered through her company, okay, independent contractors. But the government entity said, no, 3 of you really should have been W-2 employees. This is going back to, it doesn't matter what it doesn't matter what you call them. It matters what the actual facts are of that relationship, okay? And then the government entity can reclassify them based on those facts, okay? Doesn't matter that you just call them an independent contractor in your agreement. What matters are the facts, okay? Thanks, Marnie. You helped. I feel like that really helped drive the point home. All right, entity selection and tax consequences. So we had 4 LLCs, and I think it was 1 unsure. Yep. Okay. So it sounds like some of you, you know, I want to make sure, especially for the unsure, that you understand what your different options are. And then for you 4 LLCs, it's still going to be important for you to understand what a C Corp is, and even more importantly, what an S Corp tax election is, because you can be an LLC and make that S Corp tax election.
And before you get into that, there is a question that's posted on chat, and I wanted to remind everybody, if you've got a question, just go ahead and unmute yourself and, you know, and just interrupt Graham because he wants to take the questions. So this question is coming from Harigu, and she says, if your employee works 9 hours a day, one day, or so they work 9 hours on one day, and then next day they're working 7 hours, are you expected to pay your employee 1 hour of overtime rate for the 9-hour day?
No, you are not. Not unless they're working over 40 hours for that week. So if it was 9, 7, and then it added up to more than 40 for that week, then yes, that'd be an hour for overtime that day. In theory, I mean, you're really looking at a weekly basis of over 40 hours. Good question. Okay. Key considerations when we're looking at entity choices are liability, taxes, and governance. Governance being decision-making process, internal controls, and compliance. A few other considerations are ownership, administrative requirements, that would be filing, let's say, your annual report with Washington State Secretary of State, and initial formation costs and efficiency. So we just talked, these are the different entities to be discussed. I also put joint venture down there so we can briefly hit on that, because especially when you're a small business owner and we talk about goals, one of the great things that I love about BEP classes and these events that the SBTRC puts on is, you know, this is a great presentation for you, but it's networking, not only with the presenters, but the other small business owners, right? Or the primes that come on. Are there ways for you, you know, think about abundance theory, right? That there's plenty of resources to go around, and the more that you strategize or work with other people, the more likely you're going to be able to go after other jobs, find more profit, have economic efficiencies. And we'll talk a little bit more about what a joint venture is. So sole proprietorship, there's no liability coverage. Everything that you're doing is really underneath your own name or doing business as. There's real no risk mitigation, and anything that you earned on your for your business is passed. We're going to use this word pass through, meaning reported on your individual schedule. Pass through compared to separate entity tax. Okay, I'm going to go back one slide. Sole proprietorship, partnership, S Corp, LLC. Those are all 4 of them are pass-through entities. The C Corp is the only entity that would have its own tax. The C Corp could make an S Corp election, okay? But a C Corp by itself, when you're talking about taxes, is the only entity that pays the tax itself. A common question I get from people is, how much tax does my LLC have to pay? Well, your LLC is not going to pay any tax. Neither is your sole prop. Okay, neither is your separate S Corp. Everything you earn as one of those businesses is pass through to your individual income tax return. Okay, and you pay taxes as an individual on that profit or loss from your business. Only the C Corp pays a separate tax on its own, and then as the C Corp pays you personally, okay, or if you have a dividend, then we have something called double taxation. For this presentation, we're not going to spend much time on C Corps. That really isn't a concern until we're talking about 300,000 or more of profit. Okay, profit, not revenue. Revenue or gross sales is different than gross sales minus all of your costs, right? Expenses before you get to profit. Okay, 300K profit. We all want to be there, right? We're all going to grow. If we want 50 companies, 300K, 3 million profit, that's a good issue for us to talk about in the future. But for today, we're really going to be focused on sole proprietorship, S Corp, and LLC and joint venture. Okay, we're not going to talk. Yep.
Can you mention sole purpose corporations and how they vary?
A sole purpose corporation.
Oh, also known as a B Corp?
Oh, a B Corp. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. I hadn't heard of the sole I've heard of, yes, I'm aware of what B Corps are, but sole purpose are
Social.
Yeah, a C Corp and has something that's called a fiduciary duty. Okay, fiduciary duty means the highest, utmost level of trust to return profit to its shareholders. Okay, shareholder, if you own the shares of your C Corp, that's its primary duty. Okay, when all of us, and this is interesting for all of you to understand too, when we talk about in the news, trickle down economics, et cetera, and how that actually works. When corporations get more money or tax breaks, they still have a primary responsibility or fiduciary duty to maximize profit for shareholders. They do not have a primary responsibility to make sure that they're hiring more people or taking care of the community that they live in. Okay, there's no responsibility there. With a B Corp, okay, there is a responsibility now to your employees, to the people, the community that you're in. I don't actually set up a lot of B Corps. Marnie, I'm happy that you brought it up though, because it is something that is a growing trend. And it's a great way to be thinking about, it's not just about profit at the end of the day that's going to drive our corporation. It's about the community that we live in or the employees that are part of this organization. You think about the CEO that gave everyone a $70,000 salary at his company, the payroll company, as an example of let's not just be driven to maximize profits. Let's be driven instead is our fiduciary duty to return a better life, quality of life to the employees that work in this organization. And Marnie, you created change for me. I'm going to make sure that I put B Corps on here in the future. Thank you for bringing up that change and that challenge. That's good. I guess I could also bring up co-ops. It's not as applicable maybe for our construction, maybe a little, our construction folks. We won't spend time on that. But I'll dig up some information and resend that out with slides on the B Corp, just so people have it as a resource. C Corp, once again, we're not going to spend much time on this because none of you are at that point of a C Corp. It's where we want to go. Most of you are going to fall into LLC versus S Corp tax selection. Okay, that's where I want to spend my time because that's what's most applicable to you small business owners that are on this call. So LLC, if it's you, you don't necessarily need an operating agreement right away. You should still have one in place for when you need to go out and get a loan. Some of your prime contractors may require you to have an operating agreement. Your operating agreement is basically the rules of the road of how your company is going to operate, whether that's voting issues, buyout issues, voting. And if you do not have an operating agreement, what happens is you fall to the default Revised Code of Washington, RCW, okay? It's the statutory code. Without an operating agreement, you fall into that default code of how your company should operate. If you have more than one owner or any employee that's going to have some kind of vesting interest, meaning earning ownership in the company, you need to have an operating agreement, okay? Decides the rules of the road for the different members or the owners of that company. Without that, you really get into some interesting situations on, no, I thought I owned this of the company. No, why are you taking this amount of money to cover your own expenses, right? Because a lot of us as small business owners, when you want to maximize your earnings, right, and how you spend money, maybe you're going on a vacation, but you're tying in some business there, well, you get to write that off, right? Maybe if you've got another place that's more than 50 miles away from where you work, you can be a little bit more creative in how you're spending money when it's just you. When you bring on another owner, depending upon what their rights are, you need that operating agreement in writing, rules for the road, okay? Your LLC, compared to your sole proprietorship, is going to protect you from personal liability. Your primary residence isn't going to be in your LLC. Your bank account isn't going to be in your LLC. Your business activities, okay, keep that in your LLC. And if there's an accident or an issue that happens on the job, and there's a liability that PI, personal injury attorney, comes and sues people, you want to make sure that they can only sue your LLC and not you personally, okay? Just because you have an LLC does not mean that you're protected from that all of your personal assets are protected, okay? The reason why you create the LLC, but then you also need to operate the LLC in accordance with LLC rules and regulations. What does that mean? That means you've got an EIN, employee identification number, set up for your LLC, and you've got a bank account associated with that LLC, right? If you use your personal account for all of your LLC business, you can potentially lose the protection that an LLC would normally give your business to protect your personal assets, because you're no longer treating it like it's its own separate business, okay? What about when you sign contracts? Are you signing contracts underneath your name personally, or are you signing it underneath Graham Ralston, owner, Ralston Law, PLC, okay? Also matters how you're signing things. Those are the two biggest issues that I see with where small business owners go wrong, is that they don't have a separate bank account that they're keeping separate books for. And if you've got a bank account for your business and you've got a personal credit card, don't just pay your personal credit card straight from the business. Just make that simple distribution to your personal account and then pay your credit card, okay? Don't take shortcuts. Make sure you're going, following the rules of the organization so that you maintain that protection for yourself. LLC versus an S Corp, okay? This is going to be very important when we go into reducing your tax liability, okay? I've never met one client that says, please let me pay more in taxes to the government, okay?
Graham, I have a question about the governance section. I'm currently an LLC sole prop, but I will be moving into LLC S Corp. And one of the things that was discussed was I'm being paid a reasonable wage. And I think that a lot of business owners might agree with me, especially small business owners, is that it's like the amount of work I get and the pay wage or the pay that I get for that work, I want to set some aside. So I don't want like the fair market value for what I should be paid. I underpay myself so that I can use some of those funds that I get towards the business entity. And so I'm having this is probably one of the most confusing parts of the S Corp entity that is also frustrating, is this whole, I have to be paid a reasonable wage. And because right now I'm paying myself an unreasonable wage, but to help further and grow my business, because I need additional funds unless I want to go out and borrow them. And I don't think I need to go into debt to pay myself a reasonable wage.
So when you talk about, I'm going to take this a step forward. We're talking, you say you need funds for your business. What's an example of those funds that you may need for your business? Is that a general business expense?
Yeah. So for instance, any amount of anything that takes to run my business. So having to pay for a CPA, having to pay for my account. These are all things that like advertising on my website, stuff like that. So all these things, they have to be paid. And part of me going out and working is I pay myself a salary every month. And it's not a salary that is considered for what I do. It's not even, it's below average. But
Right.
I take a lot of the other funds that I don't pay myself and invest them back into the company.
Okay. Because your question was specific, I flip forward to, this is a reasonable wage chart. So I wanted to answer your question with this graphic up at the same time. And the reason why I asked you about, is it a business expense when you say reinvest into the business? Okay. Your reasonable wage is based on a comparison to net income. Net income, right, is your profit, right? So let's say you've got $200,000 of sales, of revenue, okay? After employee expense, which includes your own, okay? You got CPA, attorney, marketing, okay? Let's say that all costs $100,000, okay? Your net income is $100,000, right? So going off this chart, what does this chart say reasonable wages if you have $100,000 of net income? Are you able to see that?
It looks like it's for $100,000. Well, the only bullet point under 100,000, it shows, what is the percentages on the side, on the Y axis? What is that?
That's the percentage of net income that someone should be, remember, percentage of net income, not gross revenue.
Okay, so it says 40%.
Mm-hmm.
There's a bullet right there on 100,000 saying that 40,000. Now, is that that would be considered reasonable given the example?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
So this chart is put together. I didn't create this. This comes from an accounting group that I do seminars with, that they've put this together on IRS industry trends. Okay. Meaning that if you're within this range, the likelihood of being audited and found, not in compliance with paying yourself a reasonable wage, that as long as you're on this scale, there's a very high likelihood that you're going to be found in compliance with IRS rules and reasonable wage rules.
Okay, I feel better about that because I would be within the blue box.
Okay. And do you understand why you're paying yourself a salary or the benefit to that for an S Corp?
Well, I'm not an S Corp yet, but I have just every month, I just give myself the first of the month out of my business account. I write myself a check, and it's the same amount every month for the last 2 years.
So when you're an LLC, compared, you're going to be moving into an S Corp. LLC, I'm going to go back to our $200,000 of sales example, $100,000 of expenses. Okay.
Mhm.
In an LLC, okay, even when you pay yourself a salary, let's say you paid yourself 20,000 of that remaining 100,000 net profit, it's really just a distribution at that point. Underneath an LLC, you may call it a salary, but
Right.
it's really a distribution.
Right. Mhm.
And you have to pay self-employment tax of approximately 15.4% on that full $100,000,
Right. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Whether you pay yourself a salary or not, you're paying yourself, or that's treated as pass-through. You get
Right.
to pay 15.4%. That's $15,400
Right.
in taxes, okay?
Mhm.
What happens when you switch over to an S corp? Which, if you're already an LLC, you only have 2.5 months from January, from in the new year,
Mhm.
to make that S corp election on your 255-3 form.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. What happens? And based on this chart, right? If you have $100,000 net income profit, okay,
Mhm.
you pay yourself $40,000 of salary. That 15.4% that you were previously paying on a full $100,000, you're now only paying on the $40,000.
Yeah, which is exactly one of the reasons why kind of going over to S corp is so it's a huge benefit, right?
It is if you're at that range, okay? Because for many of our small business owners, when you're getting started, and we don't know where everyone's at on this call, but let's say there's a big difference between having $200,000 of revenue and still showing 100,000 profit, compared to you had 200,000 in revenue and you only have 20K in profit, okay? Because when you only have 20K in profit, what would this chart show? Well, you're going to, be paying yourself close to 100% of that salary. So why even go through the S corp tax election and be making quarterly payments to yourself and having salary obligations and bookkeeping obligations if you're not going to show a profit? Okay, if you're going to spend through all that money anyways, okay,
Mhm.
then it may not be worth the burden to switch over to an S corp tax election. So it starts to make sense, okay? And I'm happy, if anyone wants to talk more about this, we can talk about your specific scenario. But it really only starts to make sense to switch over when you start to look at $40,000 or $50,000 of net profit in the year, okay? Net profit. If you have less than that, you need to be considering, well, it's going to cost me maybe more to do bookkeeping, filing pay, quarterly payroll taxes,
Mhm.
and the extra burden of doing that. You don't want to start off as an S corp right away. Take that time, build up, like what you've done, Christina. And if it's starting to make sense, now you make that election, right? If it's going into 2021, and you have a better idea of what your game plan is going to be. And on that, when you're paying 15.4% on that 40,000, that's about $6,000 compared to the $15,000. That's a $9,000 savings in tax liability for 1 year. Okay. If your company stayed stagnant for 10 years, that's $90,000 over a 10-year period. If your company only grew at 10% and you reinvested that 9,000 into in what you're saving in tax into something that earned 5% year over year, your business, right? If that's earning 10% year over year, now you're going from 90,000 at the end of 10 years, you're talking about $250,000. That's retirement. That's more years of your life, right? Work smarter, not harder. I like it.
How does that all fit in with, with your all-inclusive rate, where you're figuring out you have your direct pay, which is going to be basically your salary, your overhead, and then your established profit. How does that then line up with that graphic you were showing there?
So, if you're just an LLC, let's take any kind of direct pay out of the equation because that's just a distribution. Okay. I don't like to call it a salary unless we've already moved into S corp tax status. So if you have 100, do you want to give me any kind of number examples, or do you want me to use the $200,000 example, Casey?
Let's just say, to keep it easy, what if your numbers for what? Like numbers for your direct pay?
Yeah, or any specific number questions on a direct pay and how that relates, and using this number chart.
I guess I was just curious because you were saying it was the profit, but in an all-inclusive, is that different than the profit percentage that's built into an all-inclusive rate? Are those two separate things?
When you say all-inclusive rate, are you talking about
like a FAR approved rate where you'd have your direct plus your overhead plus your profit? So let's just, if we kept it easy, let's say your direct hourly rate was $100 and you're under safe harbor, so your overhead would be $110 and then your profit would be $30 an hour.
Mm-hmm.
So
you're talking about what you bill someone else at. Okay.
Yeah.
That's just considered your gross revenue, right? As a company. So when you're, same way I work is my time and what I bill for an hour, that's my gross revenue. That's my gross sales for the year. Okay. But then I have expenses as a company, right? Marketing, rent, everything else. And I take that away. When you're not a W-2 and you're billing as a 1099 or your LLC, even if you're billing your, the LLC for that, they're the ones engaging for you. Okay. You still have to go through that process of removing all these expenses. Okay. Before you have to, even though once again, you're billing at $130 an hour. Okay. You're only paying tax on the after expense amount, right? And then you get to profit. Okay. Now being when you get to that profit, what I guess I'm trying to share is that it doesn't make sense for you to go into an S Corp tax election unless you're showing, let's say, 40,000 in profit, at least before it becomes worth it in the time burden perspective to be operating as a S Corp. Some people, you may want to be running your expenses all the way down to zero, right? If you have tax advantageous ways where you have zero in tax liability and you have an LLC and you've got another stream of revenue over here and another one over here, you don't want to just figure out a way to take more profits so that you can pay tax, right? It still has to make sense for you as a small business owner. And you may want, some people, especially when they're younger, you have to think about, buying a home and showing income on your taxes. That would be a consideration. But as we get older, if you already own a home, what's the benefit to showing income on your taxes and paying a tax liability unless you really have to, unless you can expense more things that fit into your life. And when I say expense more things, I'm talking about when you're a small business owner, maybe you're maxing out your contributions into your retirement accounts, right? Maybe you're putting 30,000 away into there, supercharging it. Okay. All of a sudden you're moving money into these tax-free growing accounts, which are also shielded from any kind of liability issues if you're ever sued personally, right? And there's a saying that sometimes goes that the way to build true wealth in this country is being your own business owner, right? Or making some right investment choices. Because when you're a small business owner, you can invest far more into these tax deferred retirement accounts than you could if you were a W-2 employee. You can also start to be really a lot more creative in how you live your personal life and writing off travel, business expense, and being creative in that area too. Casey, I'd also be happy to sit down one-on-one and you can share your specific facts with me in a confidential call, and I'd be happy to, answer those questions for you.
Graham, this is Lily. I'm gonna set up meetings with all the firms because they already messaged me as you're talking.
Okay.
Perfect.
Sounds good. To quickly touch on joint ventures, I know we are getting shorter on time. I want to make sure I touched on this. It's similar to a partnership, or each one of you could be entering into, what did we talk about earlier with an LLC? An operating agreement, okay? Joint venture, it's extremely important that you have rules for the road for that LLC, where you're both owning a partnership, that this organization, this entity is now going after a contract where both of you are collaborating on that. Who's responsible for what? That's in your operating agreement. Okay. Buy-sell agreements. If you have multiple owners in a company, what happens if there's disability or a death? You don't want your ownership in your company being left to probate, because if you have, let's say, 5 employees, all of a sudden something happens to you, you have a spouse that needs to sell the company, and you can't do anything for 4 months because it's going through probate, your business may have lost its value. Okay. Or what happens if someone else needs to step in? Most businesses don't have enough cash on hand if there are 2 partners, for one partner to buy the other one out. So even in a buy-sell agreement, you usually have to worry about the funding of that. So meaning you get a separate life insurance policy for that buy-sell agreement. I know this is getting a little bit more sophisticated. So if that's a potential issue, that's something we can talk about after this call. Feel like we already talked about the tax considerations, which was really about the difference between an LLC and an S Corp. That's what's most relevant to people on this call. Okay. Licensing, making sure that all of your contractor licenses are up to date, whatever services that you're performing are up to date with the state of Washington. That's absolutely critical. We can talk individually about each person's license if you have any issues with that. And trademarks or intellectual property, it's really just about trademarking for our construction industry participants, unless you're actually inventing some kind of technology in the construction field. It may be important to trademark your name. If you're going across state lines and you're working in Washington, Oregon, Idaho, maybe you're trademarking on a federal level, but otherwise you would just need to make sure that your trademark or business name is registered with the state of Washington. Now, what are the major issues that we see in terms of contracts for you construction companies? One, we already talked about. When you're signing these contracts, make sure you sign it as the owner of the LLC. Do not sign these contracts in your personal name. Other issues that you should be looking at as a owner is, what's the retainage on these contracts? What's the timeline? How am I getting paid? Right? What kind of bonding? What kind of subcontractor requirements? I think so many of us, and we see this so often in the transportation industry, unfortunately, is that people get so excited. Yes, I'm being awarded a contract. They don't read the fine print, and they realize that the contract puts them underwater. It's a bad contract for them. They get so excited about the opportunity and thinking about the dollar figure that they don't realize that they don't have the capacity to actually perform. The requirements are too tight, and it's not going to be a good fit for them. Do not enter into a contract that you can't perform, that's not going to be good for you. I understand wanting to establish a performance record. Maybe it's with the government. Start small. Make sure you're not taking on $1 million contract that's going to put you under. Maybe a break-even contract at 10 or 20,000 is okay, but you don't want to be doing break-evens at $100,000. Okay. Read the contract. Okay. Always come. I'm happy to provide some advice. It's more important for you to know how to spot issues in the beginning, so that you can quickly identify them and bring them to counsel, whether it's on the legal side or CPA, bookkeeping side. Know how to spot these issues. Have the right team around you. You're not going to be an expert in everything that you do, but what you can be an expert in is making sure you've got the right leadership around you, right? The president doesn't know everything about every area, you know, that's why they have a secretary of transportation, interior, you have advisors for everything that you do. Build that core team around you so that if you don't know the answer right away, you've got skilled experts and advisors around you to help you answer these questions, or at least empower you to understand them moving forward, right? And that's something I do with my clients is as we solve some of these problems or issues, it's teaching you so that in the future you can understand it yourself moving forward. COVID issues, okay? Going back to the most important thing of a business is you. And part of that was adaptability. No one really saw COVID coming, okay? How do you adapt to that, right? It's about adjusting to the marketplace and where it is now. Many of you said that, or the majority of you said that this has impacted you negatively, right? Financially. How do you adjust to take advantage of these large infrastructure bills that are coming out? This is actually a game changer for you. I want you to refocus and say, I'm going to use COVID in a positive way, at least financially. I know it's scary. I know there's health issues, but use this disruption, right, as a game changer for you and your business. How are you going to adapt so that you're ready to go after all of these contracts? Okay. COVID issues, we've seen new compliance issues with the state, social distancing, employment issues and worker safety, making sure that those that are at high risk have certain measures that are in place. If you fall into mandatory work at home for any of those issues or employees do, this goes back to, once again, dignity and respect. Make sure that your employees feel safe, okay? You want to follow state laws, make sure you're talking to them. Do you feel safe? Do you feel protected? I care about you. Let them know that, okay? Contracts, I know we just briefly talked about it. A sticking point that's coming up a little bit more with COVID is force majeure, meaning an act of God, okay? Is COVID considered an act of God, or people canceling contracts because of COVID? It's now important to be thinking about, as you enter into some of these contracts, you know, could any further state restrictions be a reason to cancel this contract or not? That's some important fine print for you to be looking at within these contracts, okay? When it comes to government assistance, I know the presentation isn't about this, but I want to drive it home. You need to be looking at federal, state, city, county, grants first, financing next. I know a couple of you said you had Paycheck Protection Program is expecting another round. I consider that almost a grant, okay? If you're looking at economic injury, disaster loan financing, 3.75% interest rate, okay? But what can you get? Grants are free money that you don't have to repay. Go after it. Get that money. Build your business with it. It's free money. You can spend hours performing on a contract to have a margin in a couple months of making $10,000. You can spend a couple hours, 2 hours, and get a grant for $10,000 or $20,000. Work smarter, not harder, okay? Overall, remember that everything begins with you, right? What you're doing in your personal life is going to carry over into your business life. Make sure that you're taking care of yourself, staying healthy, especially in light of COVID. If you're not there because you're sick, your company isn't going to be operating, right? And we want you around anyways, okay? Make sure you've got a great team around you for your company. You don't have to do everything yourself. Make sure you have mentors, people you could do joint venturing with. Talk to your other cohorts in the BEP program. I know it's Zoom and it's virtual, but have an accountability group. I know you've got these classes right now, but what are you going to do afterwards to hold yourself accountable, right? Are you staying on track? Stay in touch with your other peers to keep yourself accountable for things that you're doing. And speaking of accountability, when I talk about the most important thing is you, I have a challenge for you, which is choose one habit that you want to adapt starting next Monday. What do you want to change in your personal life that will also improve your business? And I want you to be accountable. So if any of us have one-on-one calls, I want to hear what that habit is that you guys have taken the challenge on to adapt to, and we can talk about that. But you don't have to make all these changes at one point in time. I want you to remember that these things take baby steps, right? You're not going to go from 1 to 50 employees or 3 million in a couple months. It takes time. Be patient. You build those habits slowly, but as you build those consistent habits, you also have them when you do have that $3 million in revenue. If you have any questions, I look forward to connecting with you guys one-on-one, and thanks for joining today.
Okay, anybody, any questions for Graham? Any other
That was great.
questions?
Thank you very much.
Yes, I do have a question for him.
Okay, go ahead,
Yes.
Alton.
How does one ask question to inform the employer before hiring? Give a good example. I'd hired someone and the interview went quite fine. Everything was great. 3 days later, she told me, oh, I gotta leave my little baby. I heard just got rushed to the hospital. So it was just constant. Now, I never knew of the little baby during the interview. It was 3 days after the fact. So I'm thinking, how does one avoid a scenario like so in future? Because the government is kind of sensitive. They don't want to ask certain sensitive questions. But the employer needs to know certain information up front so you can make an informed decision before hiring. And thank you.
Yes, good question. It's not just about asking that information. It's also about being clear on what your expectations and guidelines are for the position. So it's a balance between learning about potential candidates, but also when you're advertising for the job, it's our role as an owner to make sure that we're communicating our expectations. Did we share that we need someone available for those 8 hours every day? That's the expectation of the job, that they're going to be there, that this is what we need from someone, so that that person, hopefully the candidate, can make that decision on their own. They say, oh, this job doesn't look like it has that much flexibility, so it may not work for me, right? You want to make sure that you're attracting the right candidates to what you need. And if you're not communicating that specific need, then that may be on you as the employer. I don't know what you communicated, and that is a tough situation, but you always want to, once again, think about compassion. You definitely, we can talk one-on-one about this, but you don't want to, actually, I won't say this to you directly, but employers don't want to terminate anyone because of at-home childcare. You don't want to be, an employer wouldn't want to put anything like that in an email. But I think what's important for an employer to do is make sure that expectations are clear for the job, right? This comes down to the communication between the two of you. Is this a once-off situation? I know it's 3 days after the fact. Maybe it is just a once-off, right? But if you're not communicating the importance of the availability of the person, you have to do that in a delicate way and let them know, once again, dignity and respect. How would you want to be treated if you're a single father and you had a kid, emergencies that are coming up, right? And she needs to be also compassionate towards you, that if you're also the only, if there's only 2 people in the business and you're paying, that second person you hire is the second most important part of that company, then you have to, the compassion has to go both ways, because it's also a large cost for you as a business owner and your ability to go forward in covering her salary.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I'm happy to talk to you more offline, and we can talk about specific language that you may use when you communicate with her.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Any other questions for Graham? I'm seeing in the chat, Graham, thank you. Wonderful presentation. Christina says, thank you for the presentation. Hergu, they enjoyed the presentation and the information that you shared today. And then we'll be in touch. I'm sure Lily will be in touch with you because she's got a lot of people asking questions. So we're scheduling some meetings for you.
Okay, sounds great, guys.
All right, good to see you again,
Good to meet
Graham.
everyone. Thanks for coming today.